Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with yet another box that still exists, and in this case, one that represents a fascinating phenomenon, the modern conductor who does not like to make recordings, or who is not comfortable in the studio. Now, we've talked about this guy a little bit. I mean, Klaus Tennstedt. Now, Tennstedt's career was fascinating. He was basically kind of a nobody in East Germany. I mean, a decent workaday conductor. And one day he was zipping through sort of customs in East Germany, and he noticed that the customs people had accidentally stamped his passport or his papers with permission to emigrate. It was a total mistake, but he just kept walking. He later retrieved his wife, and the rest, as they say, is history. He wound up in the UK, and of course the West was like thrilled that this guy escaped. So it was a fun story all by itself, and he had a very, very good career. But it was marred by constant ill health, and he was sort of the Montserrat Caballé of conductors. You know, Caballé was famous for not showing up, and so was Tennstedt. There was a fabulous, fabulous joke in opera news, a cartoon once that had an agent saying, Madame Caballé will be available for only a limited number of cancellations this season. Well, that's how it was with Tennstedt. He was as likely not to show up as to show up, which of course only made his participation in live performances all the more valuable because of his scarcity. And I've always said that scarcity, there's value in scarcity, something the classical music industry has never quite figured out, actually, and despite all the evidence to the contrary. And he did not like making records. He was not comfortable making records. And indeed, the recorded evidence is that his live stuff tended to be far more exciting and intense than his studio stuff. That's really, I think, unquestionable. But his inability to show up actually had its benefits, because I remember quite vividly he was scheduled to do a series of concerts, including a Mahler 4 with the New York Philharmonic, which of course was canceled. And so instead, Lenny showed up, Leonard Bernstein, and they substituted Mahler 2, a whole series of them. And I was there for every single concert. I actually was sort of around Lincoln Center when he didn't show up, when the news came that he wasn't coming, and they replaced it with Bernstein doing Mahler 2. So I swooped in on the box office and scarfed up as many tickets as I humanly could on the day, because everybody was giving them up because Tennstedt wasn't showing up, and they didn't know who was. And those impromptu Mahler 2nd concerts were some of the greatest concerts I've ever seen in my life. I was so grateful to Maestro Tennstedt for not showing up. But he was, in fact, truly ill, and he passed away a few years thereafter, not before making a pretty respectable discography, much of it with the London Philharmonic. And here it is. Now, naturally, it is called, let me see, The Great Recordings. Now, you know that when a major label puts out a box called The Great Recordings, that actually means whatever junk we have sitting around in the catalog or in our archives, we'll throw it in a box and we'll call it The Great Recordings. And that's what happened here, because many of these are not great recordings. That's just the truth. And I'm going to run down what's in here rather quickly and let you know what's what. And we will take it from there, because there's lots of live stuff with Tennstedt, too. And most of that is far more interesting than what's in here. So let's just go through it. First, we have some Beethoven, the Eroica, and overtures to the Creatures of Prometheus, Coriolan, and Egmont. Now, none of this is terrible. It's not terrible. It's just not great. I mean, Tennstedt was a spontaneous kind of guy, and you just never knew what you were going to get. In fact, the blurb here on the back is rather kind of equivocal. It says, A studio nightmare, remarked Norman Lebrecht, who wouldn't know a studio nightmare if, well, never mind, of this wild and uncontainable podium genius. Oh my goodness, whose performances were as unpredictable and addictive as the man himself. It's an oxymoron there, isn't it? Not an oxymoron, it's a tautology, it's a something, it's a contradiction. Let's just be normal. That's what it is. It's a contradiction. When he could be coaxed into a recording studio with his favorite Austro-German repertoire, the results were spontaneously inflected, impassioned, even incendiary, drawing the best out of orchestras, as well as their hard-won respect and affection. Well, on the one hand, when he could be coaxed into the studio and he didn't like it, but when he could be, it was always fabulous. That's what they're saying here. No, not at all. It wasn't always fabulous. Absolutely not. Anyway, this Eroica is okay, but there's like a live one on Hensler, which I reviewed and which I talked about in my Eroica summary, which is just amazing. And it's just much better than this one. It's not that these are bad. They're not bad. They're just not as exciting as they could be with him. And because he was so improvisational, shall we say, you gotta choose your battles. In fact, they say, well, he was so much better live than he was in the studio. Well, that's true. He could be. But if you never knew what you were going to get, you never knew what you were going to get. And it didn't matter whether it was live or in the studio. It's not really a dichotomy that's fair to draw, because he could be just as dismal live as he could be in the studio. You just didn't know. Unpredictable, it means what it says. It's unpredictable. So, you just have to hope for the best. So this Eroica is okay, but it's not as great by any means as the other ones that we have. And then we have more Beethoven, Symphony 6 and 8, and the Fidelio Overture. Nothing special. It's just that simple. Nothing special. Okay, but not great. Then, let's see, Brahms, Symphony No. 1, and the German Requiem, and the Schicksalslied. This German Requiem is actually better than a lot of people suggest, better than I've suggested, because I just listened to it again. And it's not bad at all. Not bad at all. So that's nice. It's nice to know. The Brahms First Symphony, again, it has the makings of something quite memorable, but doesn't exactly get there. You wish it would, but it doesn't. And then let's see, what do we have? Bruckner 4 and Bruckner 8. Well, the fourth is one of the other problems Tennstedt had. I think the fourth was with Berlin, wasn't it? Let me make sure I have this straight. Brahms, let's see. Bruckner 4, yes, it's with Berlin. And the eighth is, what does it say here? It doesn't say. It was recorded in Abbey Road Studio. I think they're missing something here, but it was with the LPO. Actually, the eighth is more interesting than the fourth. The fourth is with Berlin. Berlin, you could play it in its sleep, and it sounds like sometimes they are. The eighth is sort of a neurotic performance, but it's sort of a neurotic symphony, and some people swear by this eighth. I'm not one of those people. I'm really not. I think the piece needs a little bit more grandeur. But if you like kind of hand-wringing neurosis in the eighth, this is an interesting eighth. It really is. I'm not going to dismiss it. It was never really competitive, but it's interesting, and that may be enough for some people. It's just funny to notice. One of the problems that Tennstedt had also was that his recordings were made on the cusp of the digital changeover. And so, frankly, EMI, which was recording him, had real issues with its early digital recordings. Some of them sounded just terrible, including quite a few Tennstedt recordings. Some of his Mahler, for example, 4 and 7, early digital recordings. Oh, they were just awful. And you sort of knew that had they been available in better sound, they might have been more competitive. But they just weren't, because they sounded just blah. And so some of these recordings were blah as a result of that, and there's nothing you can do about it. Then we get the extra Mahler 1 he did. This is from 1990. with the Chicago Symphony recorded live. And I remember how excited everybody was that this thing was coming. I mean, it was like, oh, wow, live at Chicago, it's Tennstedt. The result turned out to be rather dull, actually. And so it remains, rather dull. I'm looking at the timings here, and I remember the reason. Well, I can see the reason. It's 18 minutes for the first movement. That's pretty slow. It really is. It's just droopy. It takes quite a while to get going. 22 minutes plus for the finale. It has just a lack of tension throughout that makes it a slog, frankly. And then we get finally we're on disc 8, and there's something really great. The Schumann-Renish Symphony. This was always a really fine Renish Symphony. And this is also with Berlin. And you'd think, it's really interesting because Tennstedt's impulsiveness, if you want to call it that, works really well with Schumann. Schumann is one of those composers who, however sort of clunky in German he sounds, we need to remember he was nuts. And when you let that aspect of the music come out, that freedom and then fluidity, it can be really, really astonishingly great. And Tennstedt catches quite a bit of that in this Renish. And then you get the Fourth Symphony, which is almost as good. It's from 10 years earlier. It's from 1980. And the Renish, let me see, were these for the same period? Or was I looking, was it 1990 was something else? No, that was 78. Okay, so they're 2 years apart. And the Renish is the gem in that series. The Fourth is quite good. It's all right, but that Renish is really, really fine. And it's one of those sort of sleepers. You wouldn't know how good it is. Then we get Richard Strauss. Now, you've got Zarathustra, Don Juan, and Death and Transfiguration. The gem in this pile is the Death and Transfiguration. It's really good. It's exciting. It has that wonderful improvisatory feel and a tremendous feeling of culmination at the end. I really like this Death and Transfiguration. The other stuff is just Strauss. It's okay. You could take it or leave it. Now, Wagner, this is wonderful. Tennstedt was a terrific Wagner conductor. I really, really wonder what would have happened if he had actually got a chance to do like complete operas. But I mean, who are we kidding? That wasn't going to happen. So you've got the Ring disc where you've got Ride of the Valkyries and Siegfried's stuff and his Rhine Journey and Funeral March and the entry of the gods into Valhalla and of course the Forest Murmurs, which are stupid, and the Wotan's Farewell and the Magic Fire music. These are beautiful. This is with Berlin too. And then there's another disc of Wagner stuff where you get the Tannhäuser Overture, Rienzi Overture, the Lohengrin Acts 1 and 3 stuff, and the Prelude to Meistersinger. It's all first rate, and it's really well played, and it just sounds absolutely inevitable, as Tennstedt could when he was on, and he was just on for these records. He really was. Then we've got Mendelssohn's Italian Symphony, again with Berlin. Who cares? I mean, it's an Italian symphony. Schubert's Ninth, the Great, from 83. It's well, what can I say? It's pretty good. It's pretty good, but it's not special in the way that you look for in these, improvisational Tennstedt performances. That's the problem with this stuff. It's not that it's bad. It's just that you can do better. It's a question of, direct competition and listening in real time. And is this really up there with the very best? Does it make you go, ooh, wow? Well, this doesn't. And Mussorgsky, A Night on Bald Mountain. Oh, this is one of the last things that came out. This is funny. This was originally coupled to the Eroica. And I remember when they released it, it was like, oh my goodness. It was the Eroica and the Night on Bald Mountain. Perfect coupling. Absolutely, those two works belong together. Of course they do. I mean, it's okay. And then we have the Hariano Suite and Lieutenant Kijé, which were originally together. And those are just fine. They're absolutely fine. They're delightful. They're well done, and it's fine. But nobody's going to, make a career on Hari Janos and Lieutenant Kijé. This is a remake, remember, of the Two Musical Fables disc with Zell and Cleveland. And this is not Zell and Cleveland. Who are we kidding? However colorful it might be. Then there's another Beethoven thing. Let's see, Leonora number 3. And the Schumann Concertstück for 4 horns with Berlin. That's really wonderful. There aren't that many recordings of the Schumann Concertstück, which is one of the great pieces of music in the history of horndom. I mean, it's so marvelous for the four horns. It's virtually unplayable and absolutely thrilling. And this is a great performance of it. And it's just amazing how hard it was to get. Because what are you going to couple it with? Well, here it's coupled with Leonora No. 3. And then finally, Dvorak's New World Symphony, again with Berlin. And, it's the New World Symphony. What am I going to say about it? It sounds like the New World Symphony. It wasn't a Tennstedt specialty. A Tennstedt specialty. It was not. No, it wasn't. So that's it. Those are the great recordings. And who are they kidding? It's not great, but it's available still. It's cheap. I think you got to go live. You got to go with that. The London Philharmonic Mahler, Live Mahler 2, and EMI released 5 and 6 that were so much more thrilling than the ones in the formal studio Mahler box. And then there were 2 Mahler 2s, I think, that came out on the LPO's own label. And there's the Hensler box of Tennstedt stuff. All of that's more interesting than this. And there's more LPO stuff. There's Strauss and the 4 Last Songs, Jesse Norman, and all kinds of things that popped out live later. And those are worth exploring. And if I do a 10 best for Tennstedt at some point, I will explore all of that stuff and we'll come to a consensus. In other words, my pick. I'm the consensus of what's really great. But in the meantime, we do have this box and it has a few terrific things in it. But is it the great recordings? Come on. I've got Swampland in New Jersey you may be interested in buying if you believe that one. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me. Take care.